This is a bonus episode that was recorded on Clubhouse. Clubhouse is an app for iOS devices that is currently open by invitation only. If you would like an invitation, text me at 917-414-2625, and if I have an invite available, I will share it with you. You can find me there at Annie Grossman. So thanks for being here, everybody. I've asked Yolanta, who is a virtual assistant specializing in dog businesses, to be here to help me moderate this room, because I've never moderated a room before, and I didn't want to get it wrong. And Anna Heyward is here. Anna wrote the wonderful, very moving, poignant article, Bad Dog, which appeared in the New Yorker last week. Anna Heyward is a School for the Dog's apprentice and started out with us as a client. I interviewed Anna for the podcast a few months ago, and then wanted to have another conversation with her for the podcast about her article, but thought it would be fun and interesting to open it up to others who read the article. So Anna, thank you for being here. And if anybody would like to ask Anna a question or discuss the article, just go ahead and use that hand-raising button on the bottom of the screen, and Yolanta or I will ping, as they say, ping you to the stage to speak. But Anna, why don't you go ahead and maybe just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you're doing these days when you're not apprenticing and you're not writing fabulous articles for the New Yorker.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for hosting this, Annie. This is, I know people have probably read cheerier and happier articles about dog care and dog stewardship and animal companionship. So, we're going to keep it light and happy today. But thank you, everyone, for reading and being here with us. And yeah, as Annie said, I'm an apprentice at School for the Dogs. I began as a client in 2017 with a dog who had really, really bad separation anxiety. And Annie and I talked about him the last time we did a podcast together. I was helped by one of the School for the Dogs senior trainers, Anna Ostroff. And that was really kind of the beginning of my interest in thinking about animal behavior, maybe not professionally, but maybe seriously. And so, fast forward a few years, I became an apprentice. I'm also now in grad school for animal behavior and welfare at Penn School of Veterinary Medicine.
And you're doing that remotely, right?
Yeah, doing everything remotely. Even my apprenticeship I've been doing remotely. I don't know, you probably talked about that a few times on the podcast already, but remote dog training is an interesting discussion to have as well. It's great for some dogs like mine. My dog would never be able to participate in a tricks class in a live setting with other dogs and people in the room. So that's been there's been the peaks and the troughs of doing everything online this past year.
Well, we're actually, I think you know this already, but we're actually in the process of putting as much of the apprenticeship as we can online. Actually, just today I was working on editing some of the video lectures, and what's really cool about it actually is that a huge part of it is going to be completely free, because we really want to take away the barriers between people who are interested in becoming dog trainers and people who can become dog trainers. So how did this article come about? I guess that, or maybe a better question is, how did Jack come into your life? Or pick or choose your questions.
Jack came into my life. I had been fostering for a couple of years on and off when Jack arrived. And it was kind of a case, it was described briefly in the piece, but I guess Jack had moved through a couple of different homes after a few different foster carers discovered that he had challenging, his behavior was really challenging and hard to predict. So he came to me. I hadn't applied to foster him or anything. I just asked if I could take him, and I said yes twice. And that's soon after discovering some of the confusing and challenging aspects of his behavior, I guess I realized, wow, he's more difficult. I mean, more difficult is, I'd had difficult fosters before, but he was difficult in a kind of a new way. So I went, after going through that whole process with Jack, and then after he died, I guess I started writing the first little seeds of the essay pretty soon after he left, but it took me quite a while to write. It took me maybe like 6 months to a year, I think, before I sent you that first draft, Annie, that you read. So it was a slow process, and it was kind of, it coincided with my beginning the apprenticeship and beginning more formal education, and some of the science in there is the result of my apprenticeship and school and that kind of thing, and the reading that I was doing alongside those pursuits.
So for those who haven't read the article, do you want to give a summary?
Yeah. So Jack was a small dog. He was middle-aged, and he needed a foster home because he'd been kicked out of a few different homes because he had aggression. He had pretty low bite inhibition, and he was unpredictable, and he didn't give too many warnings before he bit. So that was really challenging. And the first time he came to me, it became a problem for my boyfriend at the time. Quite understandably. I don't want to criticize him or anything, but he wasn't really into living with Jack. So,
well, and it should be said, you were a rather experienced foster at this point, and you'd actually started working with Anna, with another dog before this, right? Who had behavior issues.
Yeah, I had, but, and Freddie had the dog who Anna helped me with, Anna Ostroff, the senior trainer at School for the Dogs, helped me with. He had extreme reactivity, but it was just so different from Jack. Freddie had very, very serious separation anxiety. So he was really difficult to manage. He couldn't be left alone because, he would self-harm. He had really, really, really hair trigger for his anxiety, but it's really different from a dog who bites. The management strategies that we use and the training strategies that we use and the just the risks, the whole shebang, it's really different. So although I had some experience with difficult behavior, biting without warning was not something that I had experienced much of before. Little bits of predictable aggression it's kind of different from the way that Jack behaved. So Jack came back, and we started living together. And
do you think the fosters sought you out because they knew that you could, or not could handle, but might be open to trying to handle a more difficult case?
Yeah, maybe. I think they just really needed a place for Jack also, and they were just trying. Holly knew at that point that my boyfriend and I had broken up and that I was living alone, and I guess that made it that made it a more hospitable environment for Jack, because the fewer people and the more predictable his home would be, the better. So he came back, and we entered into the process of living together, and it was kind of just me kind of trying to catch up with him, because trying to compensate for what I didn't know about him, and learn about him as fast as I could, and manage his environment as best as I could. Because at the time, I did not have any formal training. I did not have all the information that I have now and the experience that I have now. And I just, it was a pretty kind of improvised process of trying to adapt to Jack. So I would do things like, stop having people over, stop playing certain kinds of music, or cooking at certain things, just trying to keep his environment as low key as possible. But it wasn't perfect, and we did have a few bite incidents. And so when I had to go away, I found another place for Jack to stay. There was another foster who had experience with aggression, with the same rescue. So he went to stay with her, but that's, it did not quite work out.
Can we back up a little bit? So, I mean, part of what I think is so interesting about your story, and really the saddest part, and those who have just joined, thanks for being here. We're discussing Anna Heyward's article, Bad Dog, which was in the New Yorker last week with Anna. I think part of what's so heartbreaking about your story is that you already had a little bit of an education on science-based, reward-based training, and you were really trying to take baby steps and do everything right by Jack, and including preparing for your trip. You were doing it in such a thoughtful, methodical manner, and then based on kind of maybe advice from your family, or just sort of like cultural fog, you had a moment of deciding that you just needed to be the boss, you needed to be the alpha. And would you describe it that way and maybe talk about what happened?
I mean, I just had a moment of thinking, like, maybe I'm overreacting here. Maybe it'll be fine if I just go ahead, and it was not. I overstepped Jack's boundaries in that moment, and it was completely my fault, resulted in a bite incident. So Jack sadly ended up being a case of behavioral euthanasia, which was not my decision, but who knows, what would have happened if he'd stayed with me. That process just led me into kind of wanting to learn what had happened and what I could have done differently. And that was when I began thinking about, changing my career and really learning science-based dog training and going back to school. So all of that happened in the wake of Jack. And funnily enough, my dog now, my foster Fail, I actually didn't know this about her when she arrived, but she was on a behavioral euthanasia list at her shelter in Texas before she came into the rescue. There was a volunteer who ended up reevaluating her and taking her out at the last minute. So I knew she had a bite history and some challenging behavior. She had multiple level 3 events, which on the Dunbar scale is, it's not great. She had broken skin and multiple attacks at different times. And so I took her in after Jack, and I was really honestly so scared of her for weeks. But in many ways, Jack really prepared me for her, and all of the learning that I've done since then has been applied to Big Girl in much more successful ways. And she's here right next to me playing with her toy.
Well, it's
very happily and calmly.
I think the part of the essay that got me the most was the ending, where you kind of imagine the moment of his death, and I read the essay before it was published, so it didn't have the title "Bad Dog" yet. But
that was chosen by the editor, but I don't object to it at all. Because I think it does do the job of kind of showing. It's an essay about what went wrong.
Yeah,
it's not a celebratory essay.
Well, I don't mind it as a title either. But as a dog trainer, as a dog trainer, I'm going to deconstruct it. In that, actually just yesterday, someone was asking me, can dogs be born bad, or is it all the owner's fault? And I said, well, before we talk about what behaviors might be born baked in and what might be brought on by the environment, including or not including the owner, let's address the fact that bad is completely it's subjective.
Well, bad is a moral term, isn't it? And it's just so unhelpful in evaluating what drives behavior.
I mean, and in another environment, a dog who is anxious or aggressive, or whatever we might call bad, those behaviors might actually benefit the dog in another environment, which could make them a good dog, right?
Right. Yeah. There are dogs whose job it is to bite. There are dogs who are trained to bite. There are times at which biting is a really important and helpful behavior. The example I like to give is one that an incident that happened with Big Girl, in which we were taking a nap together, and she's a small dog, she's 12 pounds. I rolled over in my sleep and started squishing her against the bed, which is super dangerous for her because I'm so much bigger than her. And she gave me a really sharp little nip that caused me to recoil and roll away from her. And it's like, it's a total survival behavior that was a perfect response that needed to happen in that moment. And that's why she has the bite response. It's to protect her from dangers in her environment. And who knows what had happened if she had not had that response. There are times when biting works that exist for a reason, and it's up to us as the stewards of these animals with these responses to make sure that we are managing the environment and guiding the reinforcement so that the dog is doing things that keep it safe, right? Which generally is not biting. That's not a good or helpful behavior for pet dogs. And so it's up to us to do everything we can to make sure that those kinds of extreme responses are really only ever used in extreme circumstances like that.
Yeah. I heard one dog trainer recently talking about how, a dog may be born into a situation of surplus and where the environment is perfect for them, and that can breed a confident, happy dog. But a dog might also be born into an environment where resources are scarce, and the same dog might turn into a very different kind of dog if there's a desert of the stuff a dog needs to survive. So much depends upon the world we create for the dog as far as what behaviors we're going to get. Would love to hear from anyone who is here. Hey Claudia, hey Alex, hey Anamarie, Justice, I know some of you all. If anyone read the article and would like to share anything they felt about it, or has any questions, we would love to bring you on stage. Do know we are recording this session for School for the Dogs podcast, so if you could just be aware of that, if it's okay with you, and introduce yourself. Yael, hi.
Hi, thanks for having me up here. I was not even aware of this article. I just read it after I came into the room, and oh my God, it was so moving and so touching to me. And that was just amazing that you gave so many chances to Jack. But I mean, actually, a lot of it reminded me of a dog I had as a child who we had as a puppy, who was a fear biter, because she went for also men who were carrying things, briefcases, umbrellas, men in trench coats, and we had to unfortunately put her down. The fifth person she bit was a neighbor of ours who was also like 10 years old, who came to our door like swinging a jump rope, and Mouse, which was the dog's name, like ran out of our door and bit her in the leg, and she required quite a number of stitches. Mouse was a German Shepherd, so also very different from a 10-pound dog. Had Mouse been 10 pounds, she would have gotten an ankle, and everybody probably would have laughed it off and, you know, moved on. The thing that struck me, though, just to get done with my story, is that especially a dog like Jack, that you really don't necessarily know what happened before you got him. Like, he obviously had PTSD. I mean, just his reactions and everything. That's what I kept thinking while I was reading the article.
Yeah, I think that's very likely.
Yes, and while the outcome was, like, awful, and I can understand, like, wanting to feel like you could have done more, I just want to say you really did everything for him. And in a way, he really, I mean, he was totally a dog in pain. I mean, that's everything that I got from that article, that he was just living life in pain every day and not able to handle, like, his own behavior even.
Yeah, it's a good, maybe this is a good point to raise the fact that behavioral euthanasia it's such a difficult topic. It's really painful. Nobody likes talking about this topic or having to go through the experience, but it is really misunderstood. And I think one of the important things to think about is the way that we kind of manage the dog's experience of the world. We're generally really good at thinking about things like physical pain and quality of life, but we are often kind of less adept at considering or being compassionate about the mental pain that the animal is in and the quality of life that's happening. And euthanasia being not just a sad outcome, but sometimes a humane one for the animal in question, because we have to think about what kind of life the dog is going to have available, which is can be an uncomfortable question, but, you know, living in pain is, you know, who are we doing this for? Is it for us? Is it for the dog? Those are all really important questions to think about in this sad question.
Well, and like something sort of tangentially related is that physical pain can cause behaviors that we often don't like, and it certainly is complicated with dogs because we often can't know if they're actually in physical pain.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I was brought up that, like, you know, euthanasia, it was a thing that we occasionally did have to, I mean, I hate to say put to sleep, but I grew up with many, many dogs, and we would have to, for whatever reason. They were myriad and each dog was different, but the one thing that was always, like, ingrained in us is whatever you're doing, you have to say, is this for me or for the dog? And the answer always had to be, it is the best thing for the dog.
Yeah. I mean, the safety is also a real concern, you know, in the case that you brought up with Mouse. It's just think about, like, what could have been the worst case scenario in that situation that you described with the neighbor. And, you know, dogs are not humans. They have just different everything from us. And we have to make sure that we are keeping everyone safe in the situation as well. You know, I was pretty lucky that I never had that kind of an experience with Jack. It, you know, never felt like I was truly unsafe or anything like that, even though I did feel like I was out of my depth the whole time, constantly wondering, where does this come from? What am I pushing? Am I getting toward the limit? Am I not? What's going to happen next? With a dog who's much bigger or has different kind of anatomy, it's, the equation changes a little bit depending on who the dog is and what's around.
Did you consider working with a professional trainer?
I mean, we did some training with him. The piece, I mean, Annie, I think by the time you read it, the piece was already shortened, but it started out at 40,000 words.
Well, I think I already told you. I think it should be a book, so this could be a good starting point.
Well, so there's so much that didn't go into the published essay, and that is one of the big. I've had so many people write such moving things to me since it was published. A lot of people wanting to share their own stories, their experiences with different dogs who had something in common with Jack or similar experiences that they had. But a lot of people also wanted to know, did you try any kind of training and management with him? And what about muzzles? And what about crates? And what about counter conditioning? And we did. There was training. There was lots of, certainly if I had the chance, I would do things differently. I would do different kinds of training. I, would do more and ask different people and, would have loved to have had all of the knowledge and the skills and the resources that I have now, but I didn't. We did do some training with Jack, and we did do science-based training with Jack. There was certainly no punishment involved in his training program, but we did train Jack.
And what was?
I was going to chime in on a couple.
Yeah. Is this Anamarie?
Yes.
Hey, so Anamarie, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, since we are recording this, and you are worth any introduction.
I'm worthy. I'm Anamarie. I used to be a trainer at School for the Dogs for 3 years. I'm originally from California and moved out to New York to get my master's in animal behavior from Hunter. Came back out to California, managed the shelter and behavior department for a small no-kill, which is a whole other discussion topic.
That's the whole,
no-kill shelter out here in California, and then now I'm doing my PhD in Clive Wynn's lab out of ASU. So, I think there was a lot of things that popped up for me in the article, having been both on the training side of things and the shelter side of things. And one of the things that really popped up for me, a memory, and I've experienced, I'm fortunate enough that most of my behavioral euthanasia, fortunate is a relative term, my experience has not been with personal dogs. It's been, with shelter animals. But I had this really vivid memory of, and I think there's two sides of the equation that I, bring up in this topic is, I had a family come to me when I was managing the shelter, which they came to me with a dog with a fairly severe bite history, 10-year-old doodle, small doodle. And they came to us, being a no-kill shelter, with this concept of, and I think this is also the mindset that happens with trainers, of this concept of, the shelter can either fix the problem or can give the concept of behavioral euthanasia, where people default to this idea of, they probably didn't try hard enough to do X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. So I had this family come to me, and they were obviously very distraught. They had had the dog since it was a puppy, had done literally all the right things. And they had children, so the children were a bite risk. And the wife had been bitten. There wasn't really any
issues, and I'm going through their background with them, and they're like, oh, well, we moved from Hawaii, and then we lived out there, and he's seen, vet behaviorists all over the place, and we've done different kind of positive reinforcement training, and we've done behavioral medication, and we have this whole rotation where the dog is exposed, and we have X pen set up, but it only can be out for a half an hour, and all this kind of stuff, and the dog had heart issues, so then we did a whole treatment. We went to France, and we did the whole heart replacement, and I just looked at them and I said, I want to tell you that I know this is a hard decision, but I was like, you didn't fail this dog. Because I think that's the default. Like, these were people that literally expended any type of resource that they had, and they came to this decision. They came to this point where they said, we can't have our dog in our house, but we're failing it. And they, just gave me this litany of ideas, and I just wanted to say, like, you didn't fail this dog. And then two, it would have been really easy from a shelter perspective to be like, oh my God, a 10-year-old doodle, we never get doodles in the shelter. Yeah, maybe we can fix it. But I made it really clear to them that as a, steward of the shelter and a steward for the community, I said, you've done everything for this dog. And what your dog's telling me is, your dog is, from what I'm hearing, your dog's not happy. And you giving this dog everything, and me putting it in a new environment is likely not going to change this scenario, and that's also not fair to the dog. And it was this really big kind of, and they said, but we think this can fix it, and we think this can fix it, and I said, it's time that you give your dog a really good life. It's time you.
Yeah, Anamarie, I think you might have cut out brief. Oh no, I've got you back. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I was just saying, it wasn't responsible from a shelter, quote unquote, this is on every, taking a look at this photo, of a dog. Hey, it's a highly adoptable dog. It's a doodle. Someone will pick it up in 24 hours. But that's not a responsible, that's not the point. And I made a big point to them is, dogs have evolved, and we have dogs in part that they provide opportunity to us in our lives. And no one should have a dog in their life that they feel trapped by. And because equally, in my opinion, I feel like the dog similarly feels flat in its environment. Yeah. We have dogs, and particularly coming from a shelter environment, you have dogs that have a family environment. You don't have a dog that you are, and it sounds terrible to say, but, kind of, beholden to just because you have this idea that it would be worse for it to, be euthanized when the dog's probably, frankly, like pretty miserable, stressed out all the time. Those are always things that come up to me when I have this decision, and those are really hard discussions to have, but it's the rational, it's the exposure to the public, which is what your article did.
Yeah, you have to keep the human also in mind in your humane treatment of animals in general. And I mean, what you just described sounds like such a perfect storm for so many of the misunderstood and misconceived ideas about behavioral euthanasia. And I mean, my heart really goes out to that family. It is not an easy situation to be in.
Yeah, and ultimately they left, and I said, you're welcome to surrender your dog, to this shelter. I said, I would and they had said, their behavior vets had said it. They hoped that they could get one alternative opinion. And I said, you're welcome to surrender. We'll have, we'll make it a, comfortable, transition. And they said, no, they decided that they were going to go to, some man that had dogs that lived out in the middle of Canada, and they were going to, live on that like existential farm. And I said, okay, that's your decision. And then they came back to me, 2 weeks later, and they said, he can't take it. Do you think your opinions changed? And I said, I'm sorry, my opinions haven't changed. And that was the last I ever saw them. So I don't ultimately, it's unfortunate. I don't ultimately know what happened, but I felt, as tough as it was, I felt good in the sense that I gave them the best option that they could have for themselves and their dog.
Yeah, I mean, if maybe, and hopefully our understanding of what euthanasia is will change in time, and that families like that will not feel so bad about the idea of just kind of being forced to keep this dog alive and in human company against all evidence and against all. I mean, because once in a while there will be a blue moon kind of situation where it's like this dog has a lot of problems, but there is a very unique niche situation in which this dog can live out the rest of its life. So I mean, that's kind of the situation with my dog. She has a robust bite history and she cannot be around children and she needs a lot of careful management, but I feel like I've been able to provide her with really good quality of life, and she's had a lot of successful behavior modification, and she very rarely has to go into stressful situations. Obviously, they're unavoidable. We have to go to the vet. She hates that. It's just part of the deal. She has to wear a muzzle. She has to be medicated, But it is really a difficult calculation for me to go every single day. Is her quality of life where it should be? Would I opt into the life that I'm providing for her? Yeah. She's so scared by the world in so many common situations. Is this okay? You know, what are the options for her? It's not easy for the human. So, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, you happen to be a very lucky person that you happen to be the person that got her from, you know, the shelter environment. But I think that's, you know, that adds to a whole other layer of, you know, the responsible stewardship of rescues, which I know is a whole other hot topic, of the sense of, you know, that's a decision that, and I am very fortunate. I haven't had to make that decision very often in my shelter career, but, you know, we can wait for that 1 in a million person for that dog, but then, you know, the dog's, you know, sitting in a shelter or, you know, only sees one person a day. How is that fair? And yeah, it's not fair that the dog got stuck in a shelter environment, but that's the situation that's at hand. And it's the responsibility of the shelter to not also, you know, pass the buck, because, you know, that's how I interpret it, of, you know, the shelter, you know, oh, we have this dog and, oh, there's this one person that thinks, yeah, it's, you know, okay, I can take this on.
Yeah, it's a nice idea, but it's rarely a reality.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you know, you're putting that person in the position where they do have to live their life around expens and all that kind of stuff. And not many people are like you or like me or like other people that are willing to take that on. And that's, you know, a responsibility of moving forward in the shelter world. That does have a very big, no-kill experience, and no-kill in the context of, quality of life and using aversive training methods just for the sake of not euthanizing a dog, which once again is a whole other discussion.
And I mean, not everyone has the option of opting into being like me either. You know, I'm single and I live alone. There are people with families who have to, you just have to consider people. People often feel very shamed about, as you've said, the idea of failing the dog. And if you cannot manage a dog with severe behavioral problems, that is not because you're a failure of a person, which I really want people to hear and know, that it's not easy and it's not for everyone.
Yep.
It looks like we have Jay here. Jay, would you introduce yourself? Also know that we are recording this for School for the Dogs podcast, but did you read the article, and what did you think?
I absolutely read the article. It was sent to me. I loved it, and I sent it on to some friends of mine who are also having a very similar situation with one of their pups. I have to say, Anna, you did an amazing job. They, in their situation with a dog that is temperamental, does have a level 3 bite history or category 3 bite history, and that they've been doing so much work trying to find him, trying to work with behaviorists, multiple trainers. They have very much felt that they have let the dog down by not being able to control or better his behavior, to the point where when they had their toddler in 2019, he did, despite our best efforts, he did not take very well to it. And he's been staying with me for almost a year, except when I have to be at work. So he still gets to spend time with him. I've more or less been fostering him, but he still gets to see his parents. But reading that article, they said that it really made them feel not alone in their behavior. And it really meant so much to them to read it and understand that these incidents do happen. And it's just, as Anamarie mentioned earlier, people tend to feel like we are failing the dog when we can't provide the right environment for it, or to give it the kind of happiness or the life where it's most comfortable, even if that person may not be able to provide an environment that is best suited to it. But thank you so much for writing that article. It was very touching. I can't tell you the amount of people I've sent that to. It was just wonderful.
Oh, well, thank you so much for saying so. And my heart really goes out to your friends, because, especially I can't imagine, with a toddler in the mix, that is just a really, really scary situation that nobody should be in. And it sounds like your dog agrees.
Well, that one is actually my girl. She just heard somebody at the door. She's very, very different. They tolerate each other while they're here. They're both small. He's a Shih Tzu Chihuahua mix, so he's only maybe 22 pounds, but surprising just triggers that they can't seem to pin down that let them out. But that actually led me to a question that I was going to pose to all of you. We all live in a world where a simple internet search can reveal so much information about dog behaviors or ways to train your dog. But if you do a little digging, you quickly find out so much of it is terrible advice that relies on antiquated methods that are not science-based, and even national chains of behaviorists will fall back on methods such as a bag full of chains or coins to distract a dog, which if you have an already anxious pup, it's going to just further exacerbate their conditions. What would you suggest for anyone who's listening to this and experiencing problems? Is there a set of resources that would be a go-to, or simple things to look for, behaviorists or et cetera, ethologists, for animals following that? Any information like that would be really appreciated for anybody who's picking this up or experiencing a similar condition.
Yeah, Annie is going to have probably a lot to say in response to that as well. I mean, one big thing that is not going to, the situation isn't really going to change, I think, unless we get regulation. It's an unregulated industry with no occupational licensing, and I would personally like that to change for the sake of both humans and dogs. But I guess a short way of answering that question is that you can go to apdt.com and you can look at trainers who are registered with that respected science-based professional guild, and that will show you a list of trainers who have committed to continuing education and who have passed educational standards that are really, really sound. And, it really is a buyer beware market in terms of who you can hire as a trainer and what they know about how animals learn. So I know Annie and Anamarie, there's so many Annas here, will also have answers to that question.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm actually part of my PhD work that I'm actually looking at is particularly this kind of what people are saying and how people are buying into it. So one of my work in progress right now is actually doing some qualitative text analysis of what people are putting on, what trainers are putting on their websites. And basically, kind of in summary, is basically there wasn't a lot of consistency as much as you wanted in terms of what is actually being said, which goes to the fact of people can say what they want. And considering that I pulled my data from 100 top-rated trainers from Yelp from 10 different United States cities, it's showing that people are seeing this and going and using this and highly rating these people that have no consistency of their use or their recommendations. There's kind of this, idea of, there was this one website where basically their credentials were, I used to work in the military, and all their photos were them in their, military gear, and that was their experience with dogs. Or, I have some connections to dogs. Connecting to that, a lot of them were not certified, even to the certifications that Annie or myself have of CPDT or KPA or any of that. That was very lacking. There was only about 30% out of the 100 that actually had a certification. So yeah, it is a big problem in terms of the licensing and regulation. And connected to that, another study that I'm in the process of right now is getting an idea of what methods people actually use to work through problem behaviors. I'm doing a pilot study right now with some students at ASU, the undergraduates. And, in one of the initial studies, they say, if they have a problem behavior, they ask their vet. But when you actually get to the nitty gritty of them asking where they received this information, it was friends or family. And then, to second to that was the internet. And that's been perpetuated pretty consistently across different research papers that do talk about that information. And I think unless there is someone mainstream that actually changes, everyone, I don't know if anyone knows about the new Netflix thing that just came out. With mainstream media, these things just get perpetuated. Unfortunately, positive reinforcement is slow and not very pretty, in the sense of it's kind of boring to look at from a perspective, and it's very compelling to say I took a dog that was very aggressive and I quote unquote fixed it. So there has to be a major, in my opinion, social change that I don't necessarily see in the next, unfortunately, 15 or 20 years.
Well, just to jump in and to maybe be a little bit less negative than your prediction, Anamarie, who, by the way, is one of my favorite people. And anytime you want to come back to work at School for the Dogs, you are welcome. You know how loved you are.
I know.
And thank you for being here. I mentioned earlier that we are putting so much of our apprenticeship online, and actually already if you go to schoolforthedogs.com/courses, which will bring you to our online store, which has all of our on-demand courses. One of the courses that we just put up, and we haven't even really promoted it yet because it's like that new. It's called Born to Behave, and it's completely free, and it's designed for people who want to who are interested in becoming trainers. I wouldn't say you can do this course and then you're a dog trainer, but I think it's a really good starting point. It's more than your average new dog owner who just wants their dog to not pee on the carpet. It's more than I would suggest for them to look at. But Ilana Alderman, who has worked with School for the Dogs for ages, it's really her brainchild, and I have to give her credit for really coming up with this idea of taking away the barriers so that we can have more people producing content that can be what comes up when you search for how do I get my dog to stop barking or whatever online, so that we can have more informed people who can tell their friends things, who will then tell their friends things. All the things that you're talking about, Jay, the way people learn, because, in my opinion, dog training has gotten way too mixed up with some sort of new age idea about energy, and I blame Cesar Millan a lot for that. I think we went from an era of thinking that dogs had to be trained with force to now an era that I think we're probably still in of sugarcoating the idea of training with force by talking about it in terms of energy, when the truth is, dog training is an application of behavioral science, and I think it's extremely interesting and exciting and fun, and we have these like science experiments basically that we can do at home using your dog's, nothing but your dog's kibble. So I would say that part of our mission at School for the Dogs is to make dog training more fun, more accessible. Certainly with the podcast, my goal has been to try and communicate how interesting and exciting and fun I think it can be, and how much sense, like how much it can make sense, because if you dig in just a little bit, you hit how this is an application of behavioral science, and it's so hard to argue with it. I was working a few years ago. I was invited actually to London to do a demo for a trainer who called herself like a balanced trainer, and she used to work for NASA. And I visited her home, and she had like a shot collar on the coffee table, and coins in a can that she would bring to sessions. And I just thought, like, how can this person who has been a NASA scientist not see how destructive it is to use punishment? I think you don't.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Annie. And that, to your point about energy, I would encourage anyone who ever hears that word from a dog trainer, please just ask, what do you mean? What does the word energy mean? Define it. It's so often very vague terms like that. They are almost always, in my experience, they're used when the actual mechanisms that are making things happen are not known. So you use a vague term like, oh, that's just natural, or it's energy. It's like, well, please explain.
Mother Nature, instinct.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But I would also say, everyone should learn about how fun it can be to train dogs. But also, if you are experiencing a severe behavioral problem like Jay's friends are, do hire someone who is experienced. Don't try to do it all yourself. It's you shouldn't have to try to do it all yourself. Hire a CDBC or a CBCC certified trainer, and especially if it's aggression, be safe and hire a professional.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's certainly lots of parts of dog training that aren't fun, and rolling around the ground on puppies. I'm not trying to say that, but with puppies. But I do think that it can be so fun, and that so much of what we've been sold culturally about dog training is that it's your fault if your dog isn't behaving, and dog training is like a it's something that needs to be checked off of a list. My dog is now trained, rather than it being sort of a commitment that you're making to your dog for your dog's whole life. Anna, what's next? What are you going to be doing next as far as writing about dogs? I really would like to know.
Yeah, you and my agent both. Let's defer that question for another day, for another podcast.
Anyone else here have any questions or thoughts? Thanks for being here. If you've just joined recently, we're talking with Anna Heyward, who is a writer and also an apprentice at School for the Dogs, and whose fabulous article, Bad Dog, just came out in the New Yorker. You can get to it if you just Google New Yorker Bad Dog.
Hi, you guys. Thank you so much for inviting me on stage and talking about this.
Hi, Mike.
It really is the wild, wild west out there. Pet Squad Charleston just posted about it last week, or within the last 7 days, about how there's only 3 certified trainers in our area, and the wait list to get their services is just not realistic. So the way I found my trainer, and she uses the balance method, and we were using her up until the point where we preferred to use was Patricia McConnell's article, The Cautious Canine. What is that method called? Counter conditioning. Okay. Yeah. Up until the point where we were preferred to use counter conditioning, we were using her. She was, we got our rescue from a great organization in Charleston called Pet Helpers. And she was the trainer that would come and help integrate that pet into your home. And so since that's how a lot of trainers are getting their business, I'm wondering, we have a pet business here in Charleston, and what can I do to educate these businesses on how to use science to back up the trainers that they're recommending, and just being a better advocate for animals here. Charleston is ranked 43rd out of 50 on the animal League Defense Fund. As we need a lot of help, and I want to try and help improve that situation. So I appreciate what you guys are publishing to help change that culture. I want to know what else I can do to help drive that locally. Thank you. Done speaking.
Well, the great thing, Mike, about science is that it's based on processes that are centered around evidence. So everything that we use in behavior modification is based on some kind of empirical evidence that has been gathered over years and has been, results are verifiable and repeatable. And so, I mean, not that everyone needs to become a scientist, but it can be a good exercise if you're interested to go to scholar.google.com and type in your search terms and look for peer-reviewed evidence for what you are trying to learn about. And then, of course, if you look for professional guilds that are science-based, then you can pretty much trust what you're hearing from the certified professionals. But, I understand it is really hard for just ordinary citizens who want to share their life with a dog to know what is what, because it is so, it can be really, really murky, and there's a lot of popular entertainment out there that just does a lot of damage to to people's perceptions of how things work. But maybe Anamarie has something to add to that too.
Well, I was gonna say that kind of tying into this, back to this whole idea of behavioral euthanasia in dogs that have issues. I think that's something that I've seen a lot in the shelter world, because you were mentioning that you had gotten your initial recommendation for a trainer from the shelter that you worked at, and I think because shelters often see dogs within certain small time frames and not necessarily may not necessarily be seeing dogs in a long-term event. I think historically it's been very easy and to default to the idea of using more balanced or aversive-based trainers, in the sense of you sometimes do get responses really fast. And so for shelters that are trying to get dogs out into homes and are trying to have that dog in a home and say, oh, it had this issue, or we fixed it, or you can do this method, that's something that's very desirable, not necessarily thinking about the quality of life of that animal moving forward in that condition. So I think that is something that you could try to do with other, get involved in the rescues in your area, and saying, hey, let's kind of switch the focus into long-term quality of life, as opposed to we're just going to get the dog in the home and then move forward from there. So that's something that you could try. If you make good connections to the positive reinforcement trainers in your community, you can also encourage them to reach out to their own shelters and offer if they're willing, offer potential training services, or to train volunteers. The shelter that I worked at previously didn't have any shelter behavior staff members, and then when we took over the public shelter, there was a lovely wall of prong collars on the wall, because for big dogs that pull, those can be the really easy default, and they just didn't think or didn't have the experience to look at harnesses. So simple changes like that can definitely help mindset from the shelter environment that's trying to make minute changes for the animals in their care. So you could always reach out to the shelters in your area and say, hey, this is what's worked for me, and see if they're willing to do that. Or, fundraise harnesses can be more expensive than prong collars. So helping fundraise organizations that say, hey, I'm going to, this organization, we're going to fundraise and give you a bunch of freedom harnesses. That's something that's really tangible, and maybe can make a difference if they see that, they have the same effect or better effect than something like a prong collar. Yep.
Thanks, Anamarie. Thanks, Mike. Really good question. I would also plug that we have a free masterclass that you could suggest anyone take, that I think is a good accessible introduction to science-based training. You can get there at anniegrossman.com/masterclass. And I also do encourage people who are interested in pursuing a career in dog training or just diving a little bit deeper to look at the Born to Behave course. And there's so many great books out there. I recommend anything written by Karen Pryor, Jean Donaldson, Patricia McConnell. I think you already mentioned her. Pat Miller. If anyone else up on stage here wants to shout out any books.
There's a good book. I stole it from you for a really long time, and then I think I gave it back to you. So it's somewhere at the School for the Dogs library. It's by Annie Phoenix. It's not to the extent of behavioral euthanasia, but it's the Midnight Dog Walkers. And it's about dogs that have really bad reactivity, which, for some people can be very hard to manage and feel like a failure. And that's actually written by a dog trainer and talking about her experience moving from actually, not having any idea from it. So that's something that might be Midnight Dog Walkers, I think it is.
Dr. Sophia Yin.
Yes, she has.
Yeah,
she has
great.
Great resources. Lots of great Lily Chin graphics that are out there that are generally public domain.
The one I didn't hear you mention was My Dog is My Mirror. I think it's Kevin Behan. And
Yeah, don't recommend that one.
You don't recommend it, right? It was really difficult, and we put it down rather quickly. But
I'm sorry you spent your time that way.
The doggy language book. Oh my gosh, I've scribbled so many little notes in that little pamphlet.
Is that the new Lily Chin book?
Lily Chin, yeah.
Lovely, yes,
my
love
gosh,
it.
Yeah. I want to order like a dozen copies for all of my friends.
Do it.
There's a wait list. I had to wait like 3 months to get it. It's great.
Well,
and she's got a Chirag Patel and Kathy Sadao. They're going to be talking about in the next 2 weeks. There's going to be a panel discussion on that book. So
those are two incredible contemporary trainers that you just mentioned, Mike, Kathy Sadao and Chirag Patel. And I encourage everyone who's interested to look up their work for sure.
Anna, thank you so much for doing this. If people want to follow you and learn about your future projects, what's the best way for them to do so?
I have very little social media. Big Girl has an Instagram account if you want to look at what Big Girl is doing day to day. That's my my reactive dog who I spend my time training and living with. She is biggirl.world on Instagram, but otherwise I'm not a great social media follower.
All right, well then people can just follow you on Clubhouse or keep an eye on the School for the Dogs newsletter or on Instagram. I'm sure we will continue to promote whatever it is that you do because I, for one, am a very big fan. And Yolanta, Anamarie, Jay, Mike, thanks for being here. And I am going to post this to School for the Dogs podcast, I think right now, unedited, raw material, and hope to do something like this again soon. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you, Annie.
Thank you. It was great.
Bye.
Bye.